When COVID hit, and I was meant to spend 3 weeks in April 2020 training people face-to-face in Australia, we lost 75% of our income that month.
The issue was we didn't understand our customers properly and we didn't understand our users properly. That's just a fact. So we went and did something that we thought was a good idea when in fact it was a terrible idea.
We're in business of serving our customers. If we do that well, we're profitable. If we don't do that well, we cannot be profitable.
You know, it's so hard with technology. The velocity of it only increases as time goes on. And so if you're 2 years behind, it could take you 5 years to catch up.
The kids in primary school today, 2/3 of them, by the time they graduate from high school, even not going to uni, 2/3 of them will go into jobs that aren't yet invented.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of Pulse, brought to you by Intuji. I'm Julian Wallis, and today we're joined by Ambrose Blowfield, the owner at Sales Mastery Company. Ambrose has extensive experience in the sales and marketing space, coaching thousands of people in around 26 countries around the world, and has a lot of experience in all of this. And we wanted to jump in and have a discussion today around B2B sales and digitalizing that, but also keeping the human touch to it. So glad to have you on, Ambrose. We've been chatting for a while about it. So
absolutely. And again, hats off to you guys in what you're trying to do with Pulse. I love that you're trying to uplift, business integration from both a personal perspective and a business effectiveness as well. And love watching what you guys are doing through social media.
No, I appreciate it. Well, for those that aren't aware of what you do or a bit more about your background, give us a bit more insight into your journey and how you've got to where you are today.
I appreciate that. So I did an international business degree that was bilingual. So I studied in the UK and in France. And then I joined global consumer goods giants, Procter and Gamble in the UK. And particularly having studied a lot of marketing, I chose to go into more the sales area because A, I'm obsessed with people and love the dynamism and the challenges of that. And B, I felt it would complement what I'd studied in marketing for 4 years. Then I quit listening to your accent and went to the fantastic country of Australia for 4 years. Married a Kiwi, and over the last 20 years, my wife and business partner, Joe, spent 20 years coaching and training sales teams right around the world. As you said, it's been about a dozen countries in person and over 26 online.
Yeah, awesome. It's impressive. I suppose what really, in a bit more of a detailed way, but what got you into that training and what led you to where you are today? From what I understand, and correct me where I'm wrong, but you started on, was it the marketing side first, more around that training, then went into the sales side? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we started in a small town called New Plymouth on the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand. We observed as a smaller province or state with only about 110,000 people, a lot of small businesses, and they were very good at their craft. They had a great product, great service, very passionate, but they didn't know how to win new customers. So for my wife and I, both coming from a cross of sales and marketing background, we found we wanted to give them advice on how to create the strategies to bring in new customers. And then, of course, we created a sales problem because we found they got all these leads and opportunities, but they didn't know how to close. They didn't know how to pitch what they were doing. And then once they've got their customers, they didn't know how to nurture them long term. So I simply went back to what Procter and Gamble allegedly spent $250,000 on our sales training in year one on, particularly on closing sales and account management. So we then had to teach them how to leverage that marketing. And ever since then, we've taught both.
Yeah, awesome. Well, if you were to sum it up, what would you say is probably your number one lesson out of the journey to anyone, listening, and to myself? What would you say out of learning those two areas? Obviously, they are different things, sales and marketing, but what's one of the key learning lessons that you've got out of your years of training and working with different clients?
Well, I think the first point you picked up on, a salesperson who understands marketing will always accelerate their career ahead of colleagues who don't understand marketing. In the same way, a marketer that knows how to go out in the field and talk to real customers will advance their marketing career. So for me, the greatest gift or blessing I've had in my life is that I went into sales understanding marketing, and we've taught both. And even when I was working in Australia in recruitment, which is very, very sales driven, I understood marketing. So I helped the first company was Australia's largest recruiter, helped them launch a brand new office. And I guess that for me is the fortunate thing. I think it was by luck, Julian, that I happened to jump between the two on a regular basis. But I also like variety. And I guess I get bored just doing one of those.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I totally agree with you on the sales and marketing side. There's nothing worse than having misaligned teams as one part of it, but also like you can't really function. It links to everything. I feel is obviously not just an understanding of the products and how we sell, but how we market, etc. But also even our content, right? If we're driving content from a marketing team that has nothing to do with what the sales team are hearing, what the problems they've got on the ground, it's actually addressing customer needs, etc. And on the flip side, if the sales team aren't confident that the marketing team are driving those leads or driving qualified leads, it becomes a bit of a divide. And just obviously, it's a massive part of just touches a lot of areas in the organization to know that, okay, we're one team, revenue operations, basically team revenue. We're not sales and marketing, right?
And I love that definition, team revenue. I'll go back to a practical example, but I won't name them because I know a lot of your listeners are in Australia. I worked in recruitment in Australia and particularly in downtown Sydney. And I remember walking through a floor which had sales on one side of the floor, marketing on the other side of the floor. And the financial controller that I was doing recruitment for, he said, "Oh, yeah, sales and marketing on this floor." And I said, "Oh, that's fantastic. Isn't it great that you've got alignment where the two of them on the floor?" And he said, "I'd love to say yes. But they've even arranged morning tea time and lunchtime differently so they don't have to speak." So literally avoiding one another when they're both responsible for winning or retaining customers. Now, needless to say, and I don't believe it was just for this reason, 2 years later, that business didn't exist. And it was probably a 9-figure Australian business.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
There's a lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's actually, to be honest, wider spread than probably people think in regards to how much misalignment there is. And a lot of teams don't even talk in regards to not just, marketing where we're talking about content or leads, etc., but just the whole overall customer experience side of things. And what are we doing as a business to deliver solutions? What are the problems customers are facing? What are internal problems? How are we addressing those? What are we hearing about on the digital front, etc., that we can implement in order to help propel the business forward? And I think everyone plays a role in that. As we discussed earlier, it's team revenue. How are we continuing to grow and serve our customers?
And if I was to pick up a final point on that, Julian, my wife and I were beating this drum, 15, 20 years ago. And a lot of people, it really did fall on deaf ears. Even businesses that understood there was a divide between the sales and marketing strategy and teams didn't necessarily want to fix it, whether that was through pride or ego or culture or values or lack of the right culture. And then what I found is now with the transparency of, say, CRMs and ERP systems and integrated solutions, there's literally no excuse now. A marketer can see what's gone out on social media or on the marketing plan. A marketer can see where a lead has been tracked and has it been converted by the sales team. So I love how you guys focus on technology. And to me, it's essentially removed those barriers and excuses, if you like, for not integrating the two.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. And it probably leads me into the next thing of like the current state of B2B and, the sales in B2B. And I'd love to get your thoughts on your experience, obviously being, a long time seeing the shift in a lot of in buying behavior and things like that there where, 10, 15 years ago, there was not a lot of technology around, especially in B2B. And there wasn't, it was a lot of relationships, pick up the phone, call, etc. We weren't doing a lot of online research, things like that. And so it touches off on the sales and marketing side as well. But these days, B2B buyers are expecting consumer level experiences, even if it is for consumable based businesses or reoccurring transactions, or, we maybe even have contracts with clients for delivering certain services. But what we've done today is the only way that they've actually requested those services or got insight into it is through email, or we send manual reports and things. But now the expectation is shifting that there is digital, all of that is reportable, it's in real time, they can request things, they can do whatever they need. If you're a products business, they can do returns. Again, that level of consumer experience coming to B2B, and I'd love to get your thoughts on the shift of that and the evolution of that over time.
If you'll give me just a little bit of slack, I want to set the scene of what I've seen in my lifetime in sales.
Yep.
And
Yep.
It's been pretty dramatic, the changes I've seen. And therefore I look ahead and go, wow, I'm in awe of what's coming. And particularly, as I'll mention later, we've got our daughter working part-time in our business, and she's got a head around AI in probably the space of a month, where my wife and I, one generation earlier, would probably take a year to get a head around something. So to give you some context, when I was recruiting for Procter and Gamble, they recruited 15 of us from about 3,500 applicants. And they're obsessive on people. Yes, technology, I'm sure they've improved that a lot, and lean manufacturing globally. But their obsession is people development. So the final 30 of us, before being offered the final 15 a job, they literally trained us for 3 days on, how to present, how to close, how to handle objections. And they would have us in breakout rooms, filmed on camera, doing role plays and practices. And then when we go back into the room and they'd teach us something new every hour and a half to 2 hours, they would then physically watch the footage on an actual video cassette tape to see how did we interact, how did we present. And so for me, before going into sales, before I was even offered a job in sales, that was cutting edge technology by the largest consumer goods company on the planet. And that was because of their obsession on people. So as you said for today's topic, integrating technology but not using the human touch. If you get your recruitment right, I wouldn't say all your problems have gone for the ability to grow, but that's a big piece of the puzzle done. It's like doing a jigsaw and having the outside edge done because you've let only good people come through. So
you get the right people in the right seats.
The right people in the right seats. And of course, there's technology there about personality profiling we've been teaching for 20 years that are a massive advantage. In fact, a lot of times when people got excited around things like sales process engineering, they didn't have the right people in the right seats. So the theory was good, but the execution was poor. And I would say that's almost the case 30+% of the time from what my observations are. But maybe I do just hear from those that are struggling. So for me, pre-sales, getting recruitment right, that was technology being used for that. The thing that was interesting, Julian, and nowadays we'd say this is quite a sexist decision, but in the early days, because I chose the away from home market at P&G, we were not given mobile phones as males, because they wanted females to have them to look after their health and well-being, and they simply didn't care about the safety of the males. Now, the driving force behind that was to force us to be organized. And for me, that is critical. And despite the fact that my wife and business partner of 20 years would likely say I'm disorganized, it really forced me to be, again, in those days, paper-based and laptop-based from home with no admin support, no centralized database or intranet to log into. And removing the mobile phone meant we had to create disciplines as salespeople, that you'd go out on the road, you'd know where you're going, you'd print it off the addresses because you did have a printer at home. Back then, no GPS, no TomToms, so literally books of getting around the sales territory. And despite the fact that it's sounding so old for your generation, it forced disciplines. I think one of the mistakes in every walk of life and division when it comes to integrating technologies, they think technology will replace the need to think. And that is not true. Any CRM is only as good as the data, and it's only as good as what data we put into it by people. So that was my starting point. And then in the early days, our marketers, because P&G is very advertising and marketing driven, would give us laptops and they'd give us these amazing presentations with market analysis and product analysis where we could say to our resellers, because we were selling B2B, hey, look at the graphics. This proves this product launch is going to be great. Back then, it was also too soon. Typically, the buyers that I was dealing with would turn away if I showed them something flashy on marketing. Now, that's changed. Last 25 years, they'll embrace that customer knowledge, that insights into the marketplace, because it gives them an advantage. But literally, I had breakthroughs when I shut my laptop, put it in my briefcase, had a blank piece of paper, this is the human touch that you put as today's title, and sat down and said, what can I do to serve you? And you've said those words already, Julian. We're in business of serving our customers. And if we do that well, we're profitable. If we don't do that well, we cannot be profitable.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. One way I describe it, and I've talked about this regarding AI, and everyone has their own opinions on it, but if you think any technology is a replacement or it's just you can be lazy with it and it will make you just better. It's as in not like it will just accelerate you being lazy.
Very
right?
true.
So you might be able to, even with AI, you might be able to produce 10 times the amount, but it's all trash. Like it's not, as in it's not good, as in you can't be lazy, and it still doesn't replace the need to think. It doesn't replace the need for human creativity and things like that there. But if you're prepared to use it in the right way, it can, for the right person, it can 10, 20 times what they're able to do. Even myself, I know this through my own experience, not through just talking about the hype, actually implementing things that we've done internally, and things for myself that have enabled me to do. But even 6 months ago, I could never have done that amount of stuff that I'm able to do. And linking that back to the sales side is, I totally agree. It's the same thing when we're looking at any of these digital transformation projects, or digital customer experience projects where we are trying to digitalize the sales process, where we're trying to provide, that consumer level experience to anyone in B2B. It's not about replacing humans as such. It's not about getting completely rid of that. It's about focusing on, and I keep saying this to people, it's about focusing on allowing, as humans, us to do what is best, which is build relationships, have that relationship, speak. And anything outside of that, it can be handled by technology, automation. And not only does that free you up to do the things that we're better at and we're good at, but in saying that, it gives the real-time experience for those customers to do whatever they want when they want to do it. And they know that they've still got that relationship. They can reach out and say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z, or can we help work on this? Can we do this? And so you've got the best of both worlds, really.
That's 100% correct. And you touched on something I'm pretty passionate about, because I studied international business and I grew up in Geneva, where the United Nations is. So all my friends were from all over the world, which gave me that travel bug to go to the countries they told me all about, which is probably where I spent most of my money in the last 20, 25 years. There's so much cultural difference. So with ChatGPT, which is obviously for a lot of people's avenue into AI, is probably the first step they go into. Creating content, as you said, you can create 20 times the amount of content. But then let's just pause and think about it. Firstly, it tends to be American biased, if not Northern Hemisphere biased. Language-wise, it tends to use American language, so organization has a Z in it or Z in it, as opposed to an S. Well, most of our customers are either UK, Australia, or New Zealand. Well, we speak English, not American English. And I appreciate through movies and through international corporates, they might be adopting the Americanisms around that. Flavor, O-U-R as opposed to O-R. That's just a classic example of something where, yes, you could utilize it, but if you switch off your brain, you look stupid. If I was to post something
Correct.
that's clearly Americanized, then clearly I'm not from Britain, and clearly I don't understand the fact that 2/3 of our customers in Australia, because they speak English or Aussie English as opposed to US English. Basic things, you've got to engage your brain.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I think it comes back to the point is that if you're lazy, it will just make you 10 times more lazy, as in it's not going to make you, as in you've still got to put in the work. You've got to think on your feet, and you've got to make sure that you're producing, again, quality stuff. This is what it's coming back to. But I think it's interesting touching off on this as a current state of B2B. And I see this where, even impacting massive amounts of things. I know we're working on things, again, just talking from experience internally here, about not just AI, but bringing in digitalizing our whole proposal generation. I think compared to a lot of companies, we would have a fairly efficient process in regards to our kind of industry and what we're doing. Certainly a lot of room for improvement. By no means is it perfect, but we're looking at completely digitalizing it and automating it as much as we possibly can, not to produce bad outcomes, but how can we leverage these technologies to produce better outcomes than what we're currently doing, quicker, right? And I think there's a mass amount of salespeople today that are brilliant salespeople in regards to the human connection. But as technology speeds up, you'll probably, let's say, for example, you've got two teams, and let's say, just for argument's sake, they're the same level connecting with customers, but one of them one business has built their own internal system and using technology as to how they can build proposals, they can quote things, they build out the digital customer experience with some of our own customers. I know we've talked about 3D product configurators and things like that there. And that's delivered in a day versus the other team. Yes, they've got a great relationship, but it took them 2 weeks. who do you think is going to win in the long run?
There's the classic. So you picked up at a few really important points. So they talk about in the Wild West, they're saying, one of the sayings was the quick and the dead. The only two people who stayed alive were those that were quick, and everyone else was dead. In sales, there's always a first mover advantage in presenting a solution. So if technology allows you to standardize it, make it look pretty and more consistent, that's definitely an advantage. But simply by making you quicker gives you an advantage. Now, that comes back to the psychological law. And again, in the 22 immutable laws of marketing, they talk about first mover advantage. In the psychological law, there's a thing called anchoring. If you're the first proposal or pitch back, yours becomes the anchor proposal, and every competitor pitch goes toe to toe and gets compared against yours. Every time they think about yours goes up in impact because they're thinking about yours all the time. So they don't just look at yours by itself, but the other three competitor pitches get compared against yours. So you get looked at 4 times. And the person who takes 2 weeks to come back, and I've got to say how frustrated I get when I'm coaching and training sales teams around the world, and I know they're pitching on $1 million contract or more, and they say to me something like, oh, the purchasing managers, we submitted first, but the purchasing managers told us we're going to give a 1-week extension to one of the guys submitting us. Look at it thinking, if you can't submit a proposal on time or a tender on time, how on earth will you commit to delivering products on time? You've literally proven to us you're disorganized and your systems and technology are up to the game. And how on earth they've even considered is beyond me. I mean, I just want to scream at that point because I'm somewhat passionate around excellence.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think it's a big part of where businesses are missing out on integrating. Obviously, when we talk about integrating technology into sales process, there's a lot of people listening are probably thinking, CRMs and ERPs, which absolutely. But at this point, those things should have been implemented 5-6 years ago properly. Like, as in, you're even longer than that. You're well behind the 8 ball if you're still thinking that is the gold standard. Now, don't get me wrong. If you haven't got it, go ahead, go out there, get something organized with it. I'm not saying that at all, but that's really kind of your foundation. That's your bare basics, right? Then what are you doing on top of that, where we're looking at, especially in the B2B space, customer portals, right? If you've got reoccurring sales, as I was talking about with consumables, things like that there, what are you doing to improve that customer experience and make it easier for customers to deal with you? It's not about taking away that human element, as I said, but the data is showing that people are making more decisions. And when you've got, we were talking about this in a workshop yesterday, actually, with someone about, with Amazon and what the expectation that they have set in America with return policies and with delivery times and just things like that there. And it's going like, it's literally changed not only Amazon's industry, which you can hardly call it an industry because they literally are in everything. But the point of it is that they have now shifted this expectation. That's not like a temporary thing. That now is the status quo. That's the norm, right? And so it's the same thing here in Australia, but also just in B2B in general, is that they're expecting consumer level experiences. Would you rather be the first company that delivers it? We're talking about, first movers, etc. Would you rather be on the forefront of it, making some mistakes but improving, or would you rather be waiting until your competitor does it and you do it 3 years later and you've already lost 10%, 20%, 50% of your market share?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of points you picked up on there. I mean, ones I'm really passionate about. A lot of people, sadly, we talked about lazy mentality or more of a passive approach to life. A lot of people seem to claim, and I'd say maybe this is 50% of people are guilty of this, they claim that sitting on the fence and doing nothing is the same as making no decision. And that's not true. Choosing to stop doing any advancements or taking any risks or sticking your neck out, that is a decision. You're choosing not to gain from the here and now. And look, you'll avoid a bunch of problems that way. And being the first mover of technology, I'll share a couple of examples in a moment, is costly. But not to do something is a solid decision in itself. And the question becomes how can you not move? I remember reading a quote from Jeff Bezos a while ago. Now, he's had a lot of failures over his career and, of course, some phenomenal successes. And I think he said it was some of the lines of, if you wait till you have 70 to 80% of all the research, it's already too late. And that's somebody who's obviously built multi-billion-dollar business and multi-billion-dollar failures with Pets R Us or whatever it was that he failed with dismally. But the whole point is you've got to take action. That doesn't mean go off half-cocked with no research. It doesn't mean be negligent and lazy, but you've got to move fast. Now, to give you an example, I listened to this amazing speaker who advised governments around the world around the future and things like that when we first moved to Auckland 7 or 8 years ago. And he said, look, pretty much every business that's in here right now, your business model will not be the case in the same way in 10 years' time. Your business will be redundant. It was a bold claim, and I remember people sitting there grumpy when he had roundtable discussions going, I'm not into that. And I went there thinking, I said back to my wife, look, we've got to change. Most of our business model was, go on site once a quarter, coach or train face-to-face, Zoom them around the world, and we've used many different softwares for those sorts of things over the years, come and gone, some don't exist anymore, and coach them and hold them accountable. And then when I sat down and went, well, what does that mean for us for learning and development perspective? And what I realized in our early days, and I'll say we were too soon on this, we realized that people have different personality profiles, so they actually adapt to knowledge and information differently. And as you said, with the human touch, different personalities treat customers differently. Then on top of that, customers have different personalities. So actually the dance is in sales, how am I and how is the client and how do I adapt myself to the client to serve them better? So I thought, well, we need to teach people how to read customers better personality-wise and also see the world through their own filters and be the best version of themselves. Then if you strip back to B2B sales, as you alluded to, there's actually a vast difference between different functions in B2B sales. As a rule of thumb, there are ones that are more inbound based, which we used to call customer service. There are people who are proactive from an account management perspective, sometimes extending to key account management. And then obviously you've got business development or business development managers out there. So there's 3 different functions within sales, some of whom sell face-to-face, most of whom sell by phone, and most of whom also sell by email. So back in 2017, I analyzed the personality profiles of the customers, of the individuals, how people sold. The fact is some are mature and experienced with 5+ years of training experience. Some are newbies. They need to learn different things. And we created, and believe me, Julian, you would hate to see how messy this was. This is back 2017. We created 100 different learning paths where we could drip feed people different content that they needed to learn and be trained on every single week for 12 months. And in year 2, we tracked them against 18 different sales competencies. And there was something like 1 billion pathways for year 2. Now, I will say my wife was probably right when she said, you're a bit of a nutcase, Ambrose. Nobody needs to be that personalized. But I'll be honest, I was inspired by the speaker. I thought we've got the content. We know how to teach it. That's before we even threw in some cultural aspects. And we were able to give people these unique pathways for 2 years, but the market wasn't ready. Now, was that expensive? Yep, definitely, because we're talking about recording 600 to 800 different training videos to cope with that. But it was a useful exercise to go through. It was inspiring for me to go through it, just to do the research. And I will say, back then, the technology was thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars per month just to host that. Since then, we can deliver the same level of expertise, the same level of personalization, and I think for somewhere between a fifth and a tenth of the cost. That's the difference.
Yeah, 100%. And regarding on just increasing even revenue per customer and that kind of thing, and account management, it's like we were doing, as part of our 4DCX framework, working on a project with a client in our discovery phase, and as part of that, we were interviewing stakeholders and users for a certain project and clients. But this was for a B2B portal for a business, and one of their customers was like, we'd spend basically, after we spoke with them for quite a while and extracted information, pretty much identified that they'd be potentially spending another $1 million per year if they had implemented this technology, and that they had been losing significant revenue. Not that they loved the company, right? It wasn't that they loved the customer service, they loved the relationships, they loved the brand. That wasn't the point. It wasn't that they hated that. It's just like, you have to do this at some point. We're already pushing spend elsewhere, and at some point it's going to become too difficult to deal with you because everyone else is making it easier, right, at the end of the day. And the facts of it are, what I come back to, this doesn't really relate to this conversation, but I think it demonstrates a very big point, is people often go on about privacy and that kind of thing with data, but it's human nature. People will trade anything for convenience. And that is just a pure fact of that, is that privacy, they go on about privacy and everything else, but they're not willing enough to give up convenience.
And again, if we can call time out on that, the moment you have a social media profile, if you read the terms and conditions of that, you basically give up all rights to your own privacy. The fact
Correct.
that you have a digital device, and I know it's quite controversial to talk about people like Edward Snowden from ex-CIA. We all know now, if I say a few words of I'm traveling to a particular city in Australia, and I say the name of that city, even with my phone off, guess what? Tomorrow there'll be a bunch of adverts of hotels in that city. Now, we can sit there and we can say that's conspiracy theory. Let's get past that and accept it's not. If you've got a social media profile, you've accepted no privacy. So let's just push past it and stop being so protective around it and accept that there's good from that, as you said, convenience. And there's also downside from that. I mean, that's the reality of it. We've got to grow up a little bit here and stop being such passive victims and so childish about it. We're living in a modern world. We adapt and change, and like the Wild West, or you're dead. I mean, it's as simple as that. So for me, I think we should embrace that for all the good of it. And it doesn't mean you have to have the mark of the beast or sell your soul to the devil or anything along those lines. The reality here is use it. Now, one comment I'll make on this. Personally, I'm not obsessed with technology in itself. I wasn't the sort of kid who made go-karts or pulled plugs apart or I don't know, little electronic cars and vehicles and remote controls apart. I wasn't into that, but I am driven for results. So for me, I see it as a tool. I'm not fascinated by technology for technology's sake. My wife, however, is more fascinated, and she does want to pick it apart. But that's down to personality profile.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And that's what I was saying about the privacy thing is that, I agree with what you're saying, but I would just, people will trade anything for convenience. And so bringing it back to the B2B side of things is that I think there's obviously, and this is an impossible thing to put a line on, but people will trade somewhat of a human relationship for more convenience, and not as in completely throwing that out the window. And that's obviously definitely something that's going to be subjective, but it's like at some point, if you are, let's put a mum and pop store or a smaller family business that is really amazing with their customer service, but how the actual convenience of dealing with them versus, someone else that's bigger, over time, the more and more that convenience gap widens, the more and more difficult it becomes to deal with that business. And then that becomes part of the human relationship. It's like, well, I really appreciate that you're doing all these things and you have a great, you really love working with you, etc. But it's not, it's nowhere near as easy to deal with you anymore. And I just find that fascinating. I don't know where that line is. It's different for every single business.
Yeah, and different cultures, Julian. So let's look at the UK. So the UK, with their major banks, and notoriously this happened to NatWest Bank, which was one of the major mainstream banks in the UK. Going back 25, 30 years, they said, look, we're going to outsource all of our call centers to India. Yep. Now, it wasn't necessarily that they'd chosen India was the issue here. They outsourced it and people couldn't talk locally. So they talked about, obviously, the relationship used to be back then with your local bank manager at your local branch. Well, if you've got somebody internationally, how could they learn the map of Britain? They couldn't know where the high street was. They couldn't know where the old branch was and things. So there was a lack of empathy. Now, then I remember going back to the UK maybe 15 years ago to run some sales and marketing training on one trip. And I remember seeing billboard posters in one particular town that says, hey, guess what? Our call centers are in Britain. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, so they went too far too soon to down their costs. They lost the human touch and the element. The technology allowed it to happen functionally, but it was just too soon. So being early adopters is fine if you have a good partner and if you can have some realism around that. You've got to have a guide who's going to contextualize it and go talk, as you're saying, go talk to your customer's customer and find out, are you ready to take this leap? Now, you've mentioned portal a couple of times together today. I totally agree with that. A lot of customers, even in B2B and B2C, we want to engage with customer portals because we want control. Look at why Uber grew. One of the fundamental reasons why Uber grew was their customers felt in control. What's the complaint about taxi companies around the world going back 20 years? I order my taxi to the airport, and I did this a lot around the world pre-COVID. I was traveling 140 nights a year, and I didn't know if it showed up or not. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, or what it was going to cost you as well.
Well, I'll be honest, personally, I couldn't really care less about the cost because, you kind of factor it in, it's going to be from X to Y. But not to make a flight, whether that's domestic across Europe or international to get home, I'm not missing out on my wife and daughters because you didn't show up. So what does that force me to do? Well, it's hire a car. And then all of a sudden with Uber, you can look down and go, yep, okay, so it's a peak time. There's some loading on that, but at least I can see where the car is. So the ownership passed to the customer. And let's be honest, the customer does a whole lot more work and Uber does a whole lot less work, but it's more reliable. And I think that's critical. Those companies that we saw 10 years ago in B2B, putting in customer portals, have tended to grow, partly because they engage with their customers. They sold their customer on their transformation and journey, and the customers went, I see it's in my best interest. This is a higher level of service, even though less personal contact.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's something I'm very passionate about. And I think coming back to that point with making the wrong decision, it comes back to understanding your customers / users or both is like, what's important to them. And this is what I come back to earlier is that, okay, let's spend our time doing things that we can't do with technology at this point that are important to the customer and we know that we can only do. And then we just automate the rest, right? And that's where, again, a lot of these wrong decisions are made and people go, oh, it didn't work, so they get scared off or something. But it's the fact that go back to the root cause analysis. What was the actual issue? The issue was we didn't understand our customers properly and we didn't understand our users properly. That's just a fact. So we went and did something that we thought was a good idea when in fact it was a terrible idea. And so as that probably leads me a bit more into the next phase of our discussion, which I wanted to touch off on, was like the future of B2B sales and where we see it going. And I think obviously with everything we've already talked about a little bit so far, but personally you see everything accelerating, right? That's okay. So what's happening today, what's available today, there's going to be 4, 5, 10 times whatever number available in 5 years' time. And so, even those expectations, we're talking about digitalizing, the experience, everything else, those expectations, etc., are all going to be 5, 10 times, in 5 years' time. So what are we doing today about actually analyzing that? Okay, these things take time to implement properly. What's our strategy for the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, and look, we obviously spend, when we're coaching and training a sales team, we either need to understand what is their sales strategy, or in many cases, help advise them on what their sales strategy should be. One comment I'll make with integrating technology, and you mentioned CRMs, if you haven't done it by now, what are you doing? The comment I'll make is in 20 years, our business has used 6 or 7 different CRMs, and we've definitely seen 10 good, solid, industry-leading CRMs disappear in that time as well. So when it comes to CRM or technology, part of the reason why you've got to employ and work with somebody who knows what they're doing is you set it up quicker. But also, please make sure any technology you adopt, it's easy to get out of. Because no matter what it is, the chances are somebody's going to buy them out, shut them down. Technology happens like that on a regular basis. Someone's going to come out of it. I mean, I know that Zoho CRM, people say, is a copycat of Salesforce for a quarter of the cost. I mean, look at that. I mean, that alone is an example of people chop and change, and they're less loyal anyway. So it's important to do that. Another mistake we've seen, particularly with CRMs, is not managing the change well internally. So you talked about B2B portals, for example. Salespeople, like most humans, love to be wanted and needed. Customers like to be served. And when a sales rep says, here's my business card, in the old days it used to be, here's my pager number. Nowadays, here's my cell phone. Call me day or night on anything, which is a terrible lie by a salesperson. The salesperson doesn't know anything about invoicing. They don't know when the product's going to be dispatched. It's a stupid thing for a salesperson to say, call me day or night about anything. It's a ridiculous false promise. It lets down the customer experience. It sets up the salesperson to be highly inefficient with their time. It isn't smart, but it's very common. Therefore, when you integrate technology into a sales team, a common mistake made is assuming that the guys on high who make smart decisions consulting-wise and management-wise, they assume it's going to be rolled out with the same level of passion that initiated the embracement of technology. And what we've got to allow for understanding, you talked about the human element, is that salespeople don't want to lose contact with customers, and customers in many cases initially don't want to lose contact for the salesperson because those are the habits. That's the way it's been working till now. It's not broken. But we need to make sure, and we need to respect salespeople more now, to educate them steadily with time, to get on top of embracing the technologies and what it can do for them. Even just using social selling and LinkedIn, for example, you've got to educate them multiple times to get them on board with the program. Then you've got to take time to educate the customers. But the end result is the salesperson doesn't field a bunch of calls that waste their time. Customers know where the order is, where the dispatch is. They can track orders like Domino's Pizza's been doing that for 5 or 10 years. They're more engaged and everybody wins, but we've got to slow down the change and not force it because humans are incredibly pig-headed and stubborn. And if they don't like what they think something, and remember, this is perception, not reality, they don't like what they think it's going to take away from them, they won't get on board with the program. So integration, as I talked about partners, we've used partners before for integrating the CRMs. That was a worthwhile investment because we could have just bought the software off the shelf, but it wouldn't have integrated.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, and it's a big thing, and it basically comes back to alignment and having everyone on the same page and knowing
Correct.
that, pushing that down to the team and saying, getting their buy-in. It's not just about saying, oh, we're doing this or whatever. There's valuable insights from the front line that we need to bring into these kind of things. And an example you use there is like with the portal example is, suddenly the salespeople aren't, where's my order? What's the lead time for this? What's the price for this? What's this? It's like, no, they can work on the bigger contracts, the bigger deals that have more nuance and things like that there, right? They're not answering 20 phone calls a day that are silly, stupid, that could have already been handled. Customer service team, accounts team, all of these other things, these efficiencies come into play. And you're focusing on what we can't automate, what we can't deliver, and not only automate, but deliver a better experience. I could be a customer, log in at midnight and get everything I need. And great, brilliant. I didn't have to wait till 8 a.m., phone someone up, I forgot about it, then I remember at 10:30, I ring him again, I email him, I don't get a response for 24 hours.
Or receive an incomplete order because I, as a customer, overlooked what I wanted.
Yeah, correct. And so suddenly all of that's taken away, and then we're focusing on the bigger problems, right? Or the bigger opportunities or problems, whatever it is. So totally agree with that. I think, what would your advice be to leaders or executives in these companies that don't think this is happening and for lack of a better phrase, are putting their head in the sand to pretend that, changes aren't coming, changes aren't already happening, and that, things in their business and their industry, no matter what it is, will be impacted?
Look, I think denial is an affliction that a good number of humans experience. As I said, it can be pig-headedness and stubbornness. It could be because they're fearful of change or fearful of the unknown. But if you go back to the start of your life, I mean, you couldn't walk, you couldn't talk, and it didn't stop you from trying. And admittedly, people have disabilities on both of those factors. But that not being the case, we've acquired every skill in our entire life had to be acquired from scratch. And if we have that fixed mindset, and we coach people a lot around mindset, both leaders and salespeople, to mentally push through, to take risks, to stick their neck out, because not to change, it means it's inevitable. There's an expression I often talk about with our free masterclasses we run from time to time, where I remember being told, look, if I keep doing what I've always done, I'll keep getting what I've always got. That's a lie. It's a total and utter lie. If you as a business, and particularly as a sales team, if you keep doing what you've always done to the same caliber and quality that you've always done it, you'll probably get a whole lot worse than what you've always got. Why? Because your customers are more demanding than ever before. They're comparing you to opposition's level of service and integration than before. Your competitors are hungry and working harder than you. And the reality is if you keep doing that, you're going to be living in this denial. And I'm sorry, the world's going to go by. I would say in 20 years, we must be on at least our 6th version of our core business model in 20 years. And we've mostly focused on sales development and marketing development until that time. So we haven't even changed what we teach. We're not teaching law and accountancy. We're teaching salespeople to deal with sales. Now, I'm going to pick up on one of your points about spending time as a salesperson on what adds the most value. The reality is if you've got an external sales team, one of the KPIs you've got to measure is A, how many meetings are they doing, and B, what types of meetings are they doing? Are they doing those proactive outbound meetings to develop existing relationships, proactive outbound business development meetings, or is it just scoping a deal, presenting a solution, negotiating? So there's different types of meetings. But if you're going to have people on the road, you might as well measure them being on the road. Otherwise, don't be on the road. What I find I have to teach, and I remember teaching this in Argentina bilingually last year, and I don't speak much Spanish, but I had the workbooks in Argentinian Spanish. And I was talking to the sales team there, and I'm saying it just because it was just a standalone week that my wife and I never thought we'd be teaching in South America, let alone bilingually. And saying to them, you've got to spend more time preparing for your meetings. This is where technology and information is such a blessing, because you can research customer patterns, buying patterns, market patterns, industry, regional patterns. The information is there. Salespeople need to use that information to prepare for meetings. Now, one thing I've been teaching for a couple of decades, I've had a lot of people, particularly those with 20 or 30 years of sales experience, argue with and then relent several months later and go, oh, you were right all along. I've always taught 1/3 of your success in a sales meeting comes from your preparation phase. And that's where knowledge, data, and technology is a massive advantage. Not to utilize that is negligence. That's the reality. There's no other word for it. And so what do you need to do? Read the data and then prepare. How's the flow of the conversation going to go? Which questions am I going to ask next? How will they respond to the information I share with them based on their personality, their past relationship, the competitive setup, the changes in the market, the internal pressures they have, and also what objections is this client likely to have? How will I deal with those objections? How will I respond to them? Now, that's what we've spent 20 years teaching people, but I'm going to come back to it. Nowadays, preparation is so much quicker and so much easier. People weren't doing it 20 years ago. Then people figured out they should do it, but they're not doing it to 33%.
Yeah.
I've trained salespeople, 18, 19, 20 years old, freshly out of school, maybe doing a part-time job before going into the world of sales. And they've embraced the technology, they embraced the data. Then you teach them how to structure a sales meeting, for example, and read personality profiles and other things. They outsell the guy who's been there 50, 55 years old, who's not accessing the data and relies, as you said, on relationships. Oh, I am who I am. I just know stuff. Well, I'm sorry. Everybody knows stuff these days. There's more access to information here than my brain could ever cope in 1,000 lifetimes.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And I think this is where, like, even we've talked a lot about data in regards to research. I think I agree. It's super, super helpful and important, but also like even data from, if you are structuring your systems, your CRM, your ERP, your portals, etc., properly, you can get insights into customer data you never ever would have had. And it can help you predict much more accurate, monthly revenue and things like that there, and also customer insights and trends, etc. And it's not a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination, but at the end of the day, it's the mindset behind it. And I describe it as digital first, right? Are we truly digital first? And you look at it like where, again, my way of trying to explain things simply is to say to someone, okay, in 10 years' time, are we going to be more digital or are we going to be less digital? It's an obvious yes, right? So it's going to be yes. So what are you doing today? You say that you're not digital first today. Okay, where's that line that you've got to cross in order to be digital first? Because you've just told me now that you're gonna, there's no way technology is slowing down. There's no way that digital is slowing down. There's no way those expectations are slowing down. But you're telling me today you're not digital first, like as in that doesn't line up. That says to me that you're waiting for something else to happen and you're going to be behind the eight ball. And so, I find it very, very fascinating to have those conversations with different businesses, but then to see the businesses that are digital first and then taking on that technology, embracing it, failing, improving, working on, but they're still at the forefront. They're still far the streets ahead of other people and other businesses. And this is where I just, it's so hard with technology. The faster, it's an exponential thing, right? Technology, it basically, the velocity of it only increases as time goes on. And so if you're 2 years behind, it could take you 5 years to catch up.
Yeah, so let's look at a few things. I mean, you just touched on it there briefly. Sometimes you're going to try technology, it doesn't fully integrate. Maybe in our case, it was too soon for the marketplace. But the whole point is by going through the integration and the execution of that, you train yourself to be quicker at executing. So here's an example. When the global financial crisis, which didn't really hit Australian clients of ours, but it did hit New Zealand quite severely, there was a lag behind North America and Europe. But when it hit New Zealand, we typically had to, we altered what we were training people on and coaching them on and consulting them on. So we changed our product, we changed our price point to make it more affordable, and we had to treble our sales and marketing activities to hit the same sales outcome. Now, we went into that, we changed everything we could to improve the quality of what we pitched. It didn't have an effect. A lot of businesses were down under. New Zealand didn't know how to bounce back. It had been a while since the recession previously. And we literally had to work harder for 3 times the volume for a year and a half. Now, we didn't know going into it was going to be a year and a half, but it was 18 months. And compared to some of our competitors, we grew and a lot shrunk because we could easily have got jobs for someone else. And we thought, no, we're passionate about who we serve. Let's keep going. 3 times the amount of work. Because of that, despite the fact that wasn't a particularly enjoyable experience, with long, long, long weeks, But the reality was when COVID hit, and I was meant to spend 3 weeks in April 2020 training people face-to-face in Australia, and we shut our borders in New Zealand, we lost 75% of our income that month. Now, that's quite a tough thing integrity-wise, because I was then coaching hundreds of businesses around the world to help them remodel their businesses while myself losing money for the next 3 to 4 months, whatever the period was. Now, the thing for my wife, and this is the same with technology, Jo and I just sat down, and her first response, this was about 2 days into it, when we suddenly went, holy smokes, that income we were predicting as part of 12-year training plans was killed for April and probably for the rest of the year, as far as any of us knew back then. She said, well, this is just like the GFC again. So we need to be prepared to do 3 times the amount of activity. We need to be match fit to do it for 18 months. And if we get away with it in 9 months or less, that's halved the pain. Now, the same with technology. If you integrate new system and software, not just in CRM, but other things, you get match fit about how to integrate technology. So when the technology advances, like we're delivering personalized sales training online for, a quarter of the cost, you just get quicker at adapting. I'll be honest, we're in and out of different, video software and embedding software systems and live Zoom type sessions. Now, we'll jump into any technology with about 1 day's warning. We can search it online, integrate it the next day, get on with it in 2 years' time, change again. You get match fit at becoming digital first. And I think that's the bit people forget by learning to adapt to change. Now, I've been saying this because I remember reading something because I'm passionate about children's development and education as well. That's why my wife and I coach a few sports teams, because I think it's really good for them to learn how to win and lose and work as a team. I believe that the Australian research that was done about 5 or 10 years ago that said the kids in primary school today, 2/3 of them, by the time they graduate from high school, even not going to uni, 2/3 of them will go into jobs that aren't yet invented. But we've got an industrialized British-based education system that's educating them like they were 50 years ago. We're not preparing children for the future. Now, I'll reiterate it. I'm sure I've got a personal bias towards the first one of these two. The 2 skills children need to learn is, 1, how to communicate their ideas. I would argue that's called selling your ideas. Number 2, the ability to problem solve. Because when it comes to serving customers, when it comes to living life, and when it comes to adapting to technology, that's problem solving, and you've typically got to lead a team with you. So one of the things we've done as a family, we've traveled extensively with our children, partly because I like to travel, but also to thrust them into environments where they have to problem solve, even age 2 and 8, by themselves and out of depth in the experience, because those are the 2 skills we all need in life.
Yeah, definitely adapt and overcome.
Yeah, and take people with you. I'm going to have to argue with you, Julian, because you say digital first. Because of who I am and what I teach, I always have to say people first. So if we can merge the 2 and say digital for people first, then I'll be happy to adopt yours.
No, absolutely, I agree. And just to be on that, and just to clarify my position, as I said earlier, it's not about removing the people, but the facts of it are, if you're not looking at what I say digital first, of how do we utilize this to let our people do more of what they are better at and what they are going to get, that is what I'm advocating for, is that let's use technology to do things that we can do, but it's just not the best use of our time. And we can then increase profitability, increase revenue. We're able to scale with less overhead, but we then allow our human or our teams to do things that just further propel that, right, even further. So absolutely, I think we're in agreement on that one. So I appreciate the conversation. I think it's been a really, really good conversation. I do a finale kind of segment where I ask each guest a couple of questions, and I'd like to get your answers on this one. So the first one is, what's one thing you believe businesses are not paying enough attention to right now that will be critical in the next 5 years?
Well, obviously, in the tone of what today's conversation is about, they're not open to possibilities with technology. And I really mean that at a mindset level. They're too habitualized. As humans are very habitual by nature. It takes us 66 days to fully embed a habit, and then we kind of fix on that habit. So they're just not open to change. And that's a growth mindset issue that afflicts probably 80 to 90% of the world.
Yeah, interesting. I totally agree with you. I think a large amount of the executives, leadership teams, whatever, in also large organizations are not realizing and adapting technology quick enough, and are closed to that mindset. So I agree. The second one is what legacy do you want to leave in your industry, and then how do you hope your work will influence or shape the future?
It was a very kind question. For me, I always have and always will get a thrill when I see clients of ours around the world, doing great things, winning great contracts. In some cases, I'll see it visually where, a family business goes from maybe 40 staff and suddenly they're 140 staff. And I'll see billboards around Australia going, they've made it. We were there in the early days of Concept. For me, seeing Aussie and Kiwi businesses take on the world. Our philosophy has always been to help the Davids take down the Goliaths, and less so the other way around, because the Goliaths, having come from one of the biggest Goliaths of Procter and Gamble on the planet, I know how much money they make and how easily they make it. Not to say they haven't earned it, because back then they're 150 years old when I was with them. But the reality here is that for me is the legacy. And in the early days, which we started the business, was we wanted people to be able to be financially better off working the hours they earned, because the average entrepreneur works 50 to 60-hour weeks minimum, but they don't always get the quality of life that lives from that. So if I hear that someone's taking their kids around the world, or the children's gone to university, or they've done that world trip they've always wanted to do, that to me is legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, great answer. And the final one is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career?
The thing I would thank myself for was quitting Procter and Gamble to go live in Australasia with £1,000 in my back pocket and taking a risk. That I would go back, despite the fact that if I'd stayed at P&G, most people retire multimillionaire on share options alone. It was a high pressured environment, but pretty predictable. So I would definitely have thanked myself for taking that big risk. And I guess as a sort of dovetailing into that, I would argue that salespeople need to remember this as well. I would probably have taken more risks to be bolder to win bigger contracts earlier in our business. My wife's Kiwi. One of the core values in New Zealand, particularly regional New Zealand, is humility. And our business kind of formed with that culture. And we were picking up opportunities in, say, Sydney and London and New York to train people over there. And we still didn't think we were worthy. And to me, age is nothing. Like you said, technology is advanced at. Age is irrelevant. Whether you're too young or too old, it's irrelevant. I would say to myself, be bolder and stick your neck out and just tell the world you're good enough, because most people are.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And it's an inspiring story of what you've done. So well done on that. Well, thanks for the chat today, Ambrose. I appreciate you coming on. It was a really good chat. It was really insightful for me, and interesting to have some different viewpoints and go back and forth on all different things, and appreciate you jumping on. If you've enjoyed today's episode, you can learn more at intuji.com and check out our learning center. There's a heap of other content and things on different topics there as well. And we'd also love to hear from anyone that's listening, any feedback, any guest suggestions, etc., and how we can improve, and whether or not you enjoyed the episode. If you did, share it around. And once again, Ambrose, appreciate you joining. No doubt we'll keep in touch, and thanks once again.
Thanks, Julian.